Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's video where we will answer the simple question, do you have time for Kerbal Space Program 2 Early Access? Early Access to Kerbal Space Program 2, the much anticipated sequel to one, if not the top, space simulation games, which promises exciting new parts, stunning visuals, fully revamped UI, and rich new environments, launched on February 24th. And much like any first launch attempt in the game itself, they did not check their staging. First, let's rewind a little to about a week or so before the launch, where hype was at an all-time high, but also when the cracks first began to show. Before we get into that, much like the game, this is a developing series for game reviews and previews, and would like to have you get involved with it by rating, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. Thank you so much. The system requirements for the game were released on Discord, and much to everybody's surprise, they were vastly beyond what anybody imagined, with only about 5% of Team's top user base able to play it. The requirements were shortly updated to reflect a better picture along with an explanation as to why. But the hype train had already started its derailment, as you would still be needing a fairly high-end PC to run the game, and at minimum settings. A trickle of videos from the leading KSP content creators started to premiere from their sneak peeks, and it seemed the hype train was still losing momentum, as word got out on how bare bones the game actually is. But enough about the days leading to the launch, let's get into the actual game itself and see if you actually have time to play this game. For me, the purchase, download, and install of the game went off without a hitch, right on time at 9 AM Eastern. However, it wasn't until 12 hours later that I actually launched the game for the first time on my stream. When launching the game from Steam, you're greeted with yet another launcher and asked to create a private Division account. This is a small pet peeve of mine. Why do developers and publishers do this? Of course, like most people, I skipped all that and scrolled and accepted the end user agreement and had to update the launcher, but that didn't take too long. The launcher does provide some information about the game, news, a store, which currently only sells KSP 1 DLCs and KSP 2, and a way to send feedback to the developers. This is very much the status quo when it comes to these annoying little launchers. Loading into the game, you are greeted with a fairly familiar starting screen, with a lovely ship orbiting Kerbin, and every now and then a piece of debris or a Kerbal appears and floats by along in space in classic Kerbal style. It was quaint, but the graphics were quite impressive. The overall graphics were a huge improvement over KSP 1. The parts were clean, shiny, quite detailed. The Kerbal Space Center was impressive. The Kerbal animations were quite expressive and hilarious, and the planet and moon surfaces looked great, albeit felt a little unfinished. The tutorials and some of the tip pop-ups were fully voiced and very well done, guiding the players with quite informative animations, cinematics, and even a simulation mode that walks you through building a rocket all the way to entering orbit and beyond, all without hurting a single Kerbal. This was likely where most of the development focus was, and it truly shows. So now you can learn all about orbital mechanics by watching videos and being hands-on in the game, instead of having a YouTube video open on a second monitor like you do right now. However, something was off to me about the art style. It is of course a personal preference and opinion, but KSP 1's art style evoked a sense of cobbled together parts the Kerbals found on the side of the road, or in the local landfill. However, KSP 2's art style makes the part feel quite sterile and mass-produced, almost without soul. The art style did remind me of the cartoony, bright, simple yet detailed art styles of games like 2 Point Hospital or City Skylines, with those elements even evident in the soundtrack and the UI design. The UI in KSP 2 is another one of the biggest promised overhauls, and it shows. The settings menus were fairly standard and nothing to be really surprised about. Quick note, when you load in for the first time, all settings are set to maximum, so make sure you jump in there first and change it to meet your system specs, before your GPU melts. They sometimes do revert to max settings if your game does crash. The Kerbal Space Center is an impressive campus, and it's massive, with multiple launch pads, runways, including a dock for boat and water-based launches, including underwater ones. This is where your system setup will be tested the most, as any launches or airplane flights stagger along at sometimes a single-digit FPS, even with the beefiest systems. Checking out the tracking station, you are greeted with the first basic look at the map UI, where you can check out all your vessels, debris, Kerbals, hopefully colonies, and planets. Loading into an active vessel, the map UI looks familiar, yet different. Getting used to the new UI can be difficult, and while this one lacks a little polish as displays are a little cluttered, the elements aren't consistent when it comes to design, and they feel like they're in the wrong place, and some functionality and visibility is missing, I think it's a massive improvement to the original map interface. All the information you're used to getting is there, and more, with little touches and flourishes that you will appreciate once you notice them. My biggest gripe, however, is that you can't move any of the UI elements even though it looks like you can, or resize them, but I'm sure they'll add an ability to do this in the future, or somebody will make a mod though. Back to the Kerbal Space Center and loading into the VAB, you realize it's also a massive structure, impossibly so, And it has to be, as this is your new workspace, where you can build multiple vessels simultaneously. I'll be honest, however, I haven't taken a deep enough dive into this aspect of gameplay, as I was confused by the save menu, not to mention the merging of vessels and building vessels separately caused too many issues in the gameplay later on. The workplace gives you plenty of information about your vehicle with all the tools you need to build it, and they're all clearly laid out at the bottom of the screen, including quick snapping of viewpoints into this amazing blueprint mode, which I love. Customization of individual parts is also available, but really limited to primary and accent colors, with procedural parts appearing to be only available for wings. Despite the size of the VAB, your visual space can quickly get cluttered due to the earlier mentioned chunky and simplistic art style choices for the menus. The parts menu takes up about a quarter of your screen, with the hovered over description, which can't be pinned yet to read more about the parts, taking up a little bit more. The parts are all organized by function, type, and size, and can be searched and sorted further. Fairly simple. As in KSP 1, you pick your part, drag it onto your craft, and it's pretty straightforward. Right-clicking to inspect a part, instead of bringing up its own individual menu, brings up the Parts Manager, a collection of all the parts in your vessel and all their options. While this window can be resized, you can't resize the font, and the window needs to be fairly big to show all the details necessary, taking up more of your precious screen space. The staging has been moved to the right side of the screen above the launch button. You can hover over each stage to see what parts are affected and their delta V, but you can't interact with the part directly from here. You have to yet again go into the Parts Manager. There's also a handy trip planner included. Unfortunately, it's not fully implemented and usually gives the wrong information. The launch button also shows your delta V total for the mission. However, both these and the trip planner numbers are based on the launch pad state on Kerbin and can't be changed for other situations, such as launches from other planets or in space. Once your ship is built, staging is set, you are ready to launch. You get to pick your launch site and hit that big green button and finally play the game. It's a lot of fun building the vessels. However, the majority of enjoyment for me personally is seeing if the vessel will do what it was designed to. Hitting the launch button from the vehicle assembly building is currently one of the most intense things I've had to do in the game, as I don't know if the game will crash, if the vessel will fall apart, or if nothing is happening because everything is going at 1 frame per second. You check your staging one more time, we are ready to launch. Hitting the big green button will start an amusing countdown by mission control. And while this was a nice touch, after launching the same craft half a dozen times, it starts to get repetitive. Luckily, you can skip the countdown from the launch pad or even in the settings menu for all future launches. After that, the gameplay loop is all Kerbal Space Program, iterating over launch designs, getting that orbital flight just right, fiddling with nodes to get your intercepts, missing your maneuver burns, and admiring the views. You can also explore basically all the Kerbolar system in early access, but it's only in sandbox mode. Sadly, there's no career mode, no money to worry about, no missions, no tech tree, there isn't even science experiments you can run with parts. There is, however, lots of Easter eggs spread out there, and they have slowly started to surface for those that are interested. And remember, you are doing all this while fighting the newly empowered Kraken and its bugs. And oh boy is the game full of bugs, and the Kraken is angry. The game is far from optimized, with plenty of game-breaking bugs and glitches, not just graphical ones, but gameplay, audio, and physics bugs. This is all to be expected from an early access game, and I'm sure you can find a collection of bugs online somewhere. However, given the promised level of completion the devs implied, duration of the development, and not to mention require an extremely high threshold of entry in terms of system requirements,
the game has to be performing across a wide range of machines.
So that was a fucking lie.
And yet failing even on those systems, the game feels more like a proof of concept or an early alpha rather than an early access ready for public testing. It is truly a skeleton of a game. The roadmap noted an early access launch with improved user experience, a revamped Kerbolar system, new parts, and an all-new tutorial and onboarding. With the state of the game right now, I think they've barely hit 50% of these promises. The tutorial is definitely new and great. Full marks there. However, one can't argue that the new parts are lacking. The Kerbolar system, while revamped, is far from complete, and the user experience is actually a small step back rather than an improvement on the original. Do you have time for Kerbal Space Program 2 Early Access? It saddens me to say it, but in its current state, price point, and system requirements, I don't think you should make time for KSP 2. With already missing the mark on promises, the early access feels rushed and not ready for public testing. I don't like guessing or making excuses, but it's likely pressure from higher ups to have something out there that got to the publishers and developers, as the game has been in the oven since 2019. Players are already digging into the files and code of the game, and it's clear to see that lots of work is missing, corners were cut, and overall the game is far, far, far from full release. Were our expectations too high? Did we fall into the hype trap? Did I gamble and lose on this launch? Yes to all. And to be honest, the chances were extremely high I would be disappointed with this launch, and a part of me knew this. Perhaps we have been spoiled with early access games being more feature-rich, more polished, and with fewer bugs, some even playable by the majority of the fanbase. Again, it saddens me to say it, but in its current state, price point, and system requirements, I don't think you should make time for KSP 2. I know I won't. I'm gonna wait a few more months, or even a year, play other games, maybe go back to KSP 1 and check out the modding community in more depth, as you can do what was promised, and more. In the meantime, I'll keep this game on my radar and see if they hit any of their marks in the future, and come back to it and keep you posted. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this style of game review. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. Leave a comment below on what you thought, subscribe for more videos, follow me on Twitch for live streams, and always make time for games. But not this one.